actually. An article looking back, way back almost 2 decades now.
Yeah, it takes us into a specific place, East Palo Alto, and a specific time, looking at their struggles, with youth violence, gangs, the drug trade back then.
Okay, so what's the source exactly?
It's an article from Palo Alto Online, published July 27, 2005. The title is Our Town, Life on the Street, and it's by John Kazak.
2005. Wow.
Yeah. And it's really like a time capsule, isn't it? It captures that moment and you hear from people right in the thick of it. Folks trying to leave that life, others trying to help them, and law enforcement too.
Right, all these different perspectives. So our plan for this deep dive then is to sort of unpack what this 2005 piece tells us. Pull out the key viewpoints, maybe some surprising details, and just understand the dynamics of life on the street as it was presented then.
Exactly. What was going on and maybe what can we learn looking back now?
So where does the article kick things off? How does it set the scene?
Well, it starts pretty immediately with a reference to a meeting. The East Palo Alto Crime Reduction Task Force, this was back in May 2005, pulled together by Supervisor Rose Jacobs Gibson.
Okay.
And the article mentioned some really powerful testimony at that meeting.
Yeah, I saw that. It said 8 young people sat up front in front of a packed room, just sharing how violence had directly impacted their own lives.
Yeah.
That's heavy.
Incredibly heavy. And you'd hope that kind of thing sparks real change, right? It sounds like it was powerful in the room.
Right.
But the article then introduces us to someone outside that meeting, a guy named Doug Fort. He was talking to Maida Okolo, the city's director of community services at the time.
And Fort's reaction to the meeting, all that love in the room, as he put it.
He was skeptical, basically said, yeah, lots of love, but it won't make a difference.
And why not?
One word, money, cuts right through it.
Okay, so it's about the economics for him.
Absolutely. He breaks down what he calls the basic math. The difference between making, say, $2,000 a week dealing drugs versus maybe $400 a week, if you're lucky, at a regular job.
That gap it's enormous. $2,000 versus $400.
It's huge. And Fort's point is, with that kind of difference, how you pull someone away, he says you almost have to deprogram their minds.
Deprogram.
Huh?
That's a really strong way to put it. It suggests it's not just about the money. It's like a whole belief system.
Totally. A whole worldview, really.
Yeah.
What you see as possible, as necessary for survival, even. And look, Fort knows this stuff inside out. The article tells us back in 2005, he was 27, born and raised EPA.
And he'd been in the life himself.
Oh, yeah. Former drug dealer, he says it straight up. I've sold drugs, I've been shot, I've lived the lifestyle. He isn't guessing, he's lived it.
So he has that street credibility. What made him get out?
He talks about seeing just a lot of death in front of me, realizing, as he put it, there was no future, just that stark reality hitting him.
Grim, but it pushed him to change.
Yeah, and now, in 2005, he's working with this nonprofit for youth by youth.
Right, trying to help others find a different path.
Exactly. Him and his colleagues, they're focused specifically on kids in the county jail, parolees, trying to get them to turn away from being, as the article says, gun-wielding drug dealers.
And the director, Christina Thompson, she talks about giving them tools for living. What kind of tools are we talking about?
Well, one specific thing the article mentions is pretty unique. They hand out these small cards.
The cards.
Yeah, little cards. They give them out at the San Mateo County Juvenile Hall and also to young guys on probation they meet with weekly. Some of these kids are just 13, 14 years old.
Wow. And what's on these cards?
Get this. The Commandments of the Hood.
Whoa. Okay. The Commandments of the Hood. That's something else.
It really is. The article explains they were originally written by Joe Marshall from the Omega Boys Club over in Hunters Point in SF. And they basically codify the unwritten rules, the street code for dealers and gang members.
Okay, we should probably list them out like the article does. They really give you a sense of that world.
Yeah, let's do it. So, number 1, thou shalt not snitch.
Right. Then, thou shalt handle thy business. Thou shalt do what thy gotta do.
Thou shalt get girls. Thou shalt not be no punk.
Thou shalt get thy respect. Thou shalt get thy money on.
Thou shalt put in work. Thou shalt carry a gun.
Thou shalt recruit. Thou shalt be down for thy set crewhood.
And finally, thou shalt be down for thy homeboy, right or wrong.
Man, it's a whole system laid out right there, a blueprint.
It really is. And you can see how they interlock, can't you? Like, don't snitch protects, handle thy business and get thy money on. Carrying a gat helps with get thy respect and not be no punk. It's got its own internal logic.
Yeah, it creates this bubble, this code. And this is where Doug Fort has that really complex take on it all.
Exactly. He looks at these commandments, this code he lived by, and he says, in the words of the neighborhood, this is survival.
Survival. Okay.
But then, like, in the same breath, he hits you with the other side. But it is really death.
Wow. So he gets why it feels like survival in that context, but he knows the actual end result.
Precisely. He sees the function, but also the ultimate tragic outcome. And that outcome, that reality of death, it's right there in the violent stats the article presents.
Yeah, it does acknowledge that East Palo Alto had improved a lot since like the early 90s peak. 1992 had 42 homicides, which is staggering.
A huge number. Things had gotten better. But the worry in 2005, the reason for this article, was that violence seemed to be creeping upward again.
And the specific numbers.
Well, the week right before the article came out, the city had its 7th homicide of 2005. This one was apparently a robbery gone wrong.
Okay, 7 by July. How did that compare to the year before?
That's the kicker. 7 was the total for all of 2004. So halfway through 2005, they'd already matched the previous year's total.
Oof, that's a bad trend. A really sharp increase.
Definitely. And looking a bit broader, from 2000 up to that point in 2005, the article mentions 41 homicides total. And get this, 33 of those were gun deaths.
Overwhelmingly guns. So whose perspective does the article bring in to explain why this violence is happening?
They talked to law enforcement. Lieutenant Mark Weiss, he was head of the San Mateo County Narcotics Task Force then.
Okay, the drug angle.
Right. And his view, the main driver for shootings is territory. He says drug dealers and gangs are all territorial. Simple as that.
So turf wars again.
Exactly. You step on someone's turf, violate that boundary, he says, people get hurt. He also adds an interesting observation. Maybe you weren't seeing quite as much open street-level dealing as before, but Intel suggested large-level vendors present.
Meaning the big suppliers, the source of the drugs, they were still very much active, even if it wasn't as visible on the corners.
Seems to be the implication, yeah. The underlying business the driver Fort mentioned, money was still there.
And going back to Ford, how did he view these deaths, the rising homicide rate?
His perspective is, well, it's chillingly pragmatic, born from experience, you know. He compares it to war, asks, how many people die in a war? That's what war is.
So he sees the deaths as just part of the life.
Part of the game, he says. And in the game, that's what happens. Everywhere. It's this sense of grim acceptance, almost.
That sounds incredibly bleak. Like, it's just the cost of doing business in that world. But he's also frustrated by it, right? Didn't he call it a sickness?
Oh, absolutely. Despite that pragmatic view, he clearly hates seeing it rise again. He calls it a sickness, yeah. So the youth have the disease of violence in their minds. You feel his deep frustration.
So all these threads, the money, the code, the territory, the violence, the personal cost, they all weave together into this huge challenge.
Right. The challenge the article points to, breaking what it calls the wicked cycle. You know, poverty pushing people towards drug dealing because it looks like the easy money compared to a regular job that pays way less.
But it ends with that really stark warning.
Yeah. That crucial reminder about where the life actually leads. Drug dealers don't live that long. It just cuts right through any glamour or perceived ease.
It brings it right back to Ford's point, doesn't it? The code says survival, but the reality is death.
Exactly. That's the core tension laid bare.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive into just this one article from 2005, it really does give you such a concentrated look at all the forces at play in that community at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
The economics, the street code, the tragic violence, and hearing from people like Doug Ford, who lived it, alongside the law enforcement view. It really shows how complex it all was.
It does. It's valuable to have that snapshot, those different voices captured. And, you know, thinking about those commandments of the hood presented as rules for survival.
Yeah.
And then hearing Fort, who came from that world, say so bluntly, it is really death. That contrast just sticks with you. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Wonder what?
Well, it leaves you, the listener, with something to think about. What does that specific tension, the code that promises survival but delivers death, what does that tell us about how desperate circumstances can twist the very idea of survival? And maybe what does it really take to offer a different path, an alternative that doesn't just seem viable but actually leads to, gut life?